Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is the author Imani Perry. Ms. Perry was originally from Birmingham, but she is now a chaired professor at Harvard. Imani Perry is the author of a great many books on subjects as varied as the Black National Anthem and hip-hop. Her most recent is South to America, A Journey Below the Mason-Dixon to Understand the Soul of America, which won the National Book Award and also, for Dr. Perry, the prestigious MacArthur Grant. I spoke with Imani Perry in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Dr. Perry, it is a pleasure to meet you.
It's wonderful to meet you.
We have never met before, even though I know, and we will come to it, I know we have a lot of mutual friends. These prizes, the prize that you're taking in today, the Clarence Cason Award, one, besides a lifetime of distinguished work, one of the other requirements is that you have a bona fide Alabama connection, that you are a kind of Alabama writer. And you are a child of Birmingham, and were there for a while. What were the circumstances of your birth, young girlhood, childhood? Why was your family in Birmingham? What was your mother doing? And your stepfather by that time,
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So my family is originally from Huntsville. My grandparents came to Birmingham in the 30s. And so my mother's generation all came of age in Birmingham. My mother left to go to school. She came back home, had me, and met the man who raised me, Stephen Whitman, who was a Jewish man from Brooklyn, New York, who had come to Alabama because he was inspired by the Civil Rights Movement. And so they were both political organizers and educators, often off at meetings and organizing gatherings and the like. And so I lived primarily with my grandmother, who is, of course, one of the most important influences in my life. Sure. We left Alabama when I was fairly young, but I came home every summer, and we always referred to Alabama as home. It's still where the majority of my family is. We were not a family that migrated in the Great Migration. And so I've sort of spent this lifetime coming back and forth between sort of the Northeast and Alabama, Birmingham specifically.
Yeah. Your Mr. Whitman's connection was with Miles College, wasn't it?
Yes, he worked at Miles College.
Miles was an important spot for a few years there. It faded away after a bit, but for a while it was the center of a lot of civil rights activity in Birmingham.
Absolutely, and actually Richard Arrington, who would become the first black mayor of Birmingham, was the dean at the time. He was I believe a geneticist, and my dad was his first campaign manager when he ran for city council. And so there was a lot of activism that took place at Miles, and this wonderful community of educators who were both local Alabamians and also a host of people who had come from New York and Chicago and Milwaukee and New England. Yeah.
Am I remembering, this is something I hadn't thought about in ages, but didn't someone from Yale, actually the president of Yale, move down and take over Miles for a while?
Oh, that's interesting.
Something just like that.
I actually don't know about that, but there was a lot of interest in Miles College. It was it was an important, and I actually had the wonderful opportunity last year of doing an event at Miles, which was like a homecoming of sorts, because that's where my parents met, was at Miles.
This is not of geopolitical importance, but was your mother training to be a nun?
My mother was a nun before I was born. She'd moved to New Orleans as a teenager, and joined the Order of the Sisters of the Holy Family, which is the second oldest order of black nuns in the United States. They were formed before the Civil War by three Creole women, and had this incredible history. They have a mother house in Belize. They have a community in Nigeria. They had nuns from all over the Caribbean, and so that was her sort of early, in some ways, her youth, her late adolescence. She left before taking final vows, which is very important, right? But she joined the convent because she was looking for a life of meaning. I come from a Catholic family, and she thought, a vocation was a kind of had an important social meaning. They were a real service-oriented order. They still are. And then she got involved in the civil rights movement, and so that changed her way of finding meaning, which thankfully for me, because I'm here.
And your biological father apparently fell dead in love with her.
The moment he saw her, that's what he said, yes. Yes.
Having gone up east, as folks say, you then made a tour of the most elite colleges in the world. You went to Yale first. Did you study, was that political science? What was your major at Yale?
I studied literature and American studies at Yale. And what's interesting, and this doesn't so much come through in the book, but part of what was interesting about that journey is that so much of the way in which sort of academically the South was given back to me was through my years there, right? Whether I was studying African American art history with, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name. At any rate, it's Robert Ferris Thompson, who wrote Flash of the Spirit, which is about sort of the retentions of African culture in the Americas, and particularly in the South. Studied Peter Wood's Black Majority, which is about sort of black culture in colonial South Carolina. So in some ways, the sort of relationship between my own sense of myself and what I studied came together for South to America.
And then a kind of combination degree. This is a relatively new phenomenon, but you took a PhD and a law degree at Harvard, in a sense, simultaneously.
I did. It was strange. There wasn't a joint degree program yet, so I was sort of going back and forth and writing my dissertation and taking law school courses and the like,
This, all of that, you were actually a law professor for a while.
I was for 7 years.
And did you ever practice law?
I did not. And that's partially because I was diagnosed with systemic lupus when I was in school. I was very ill when I was in graduate school. I had a job, I did the summer associate thing. I worked at Cravath, Swaine & Moore in New York, and realized though that physically I could not actually do the work of the litigator.
You could not be a junior associate.
I could not. Those 100+ hours weeks. Yeah, it was very. But I was really interested in the law. I was interested in the law because it helped me understand how our society was organized, and so I taught courses that were doctrinal but not necessarily practice oriented. So like constitutional law, contracts, which is all philosophy mostly, and did a little bit of work, law-related work here and there. But I started my career as a law professor, and then got captivated by the idea of teaching African American studies and made the switch 7 years in. And I spent 14 years on the faculty at Princeton, and now I'm at Harvard.
I was under the impression until very recently that you were still there.
Oh yes. Well, I was until very recently. I've been at Harvard for less than a year.
Right. Well, you have a shelf of books, and we'll touch biography of Lorraine Hansberry, a book on hip hop, a book on essentially racism in why don't we call it the resilience of racism in America. The Black National Anthem.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not all over the place, really. Once you figure out the connections, but I'm interested in the book that we might call The Letter to Your Son.
Yes.
That comes up these last few years again and again. how will a black parent teach a black male child,
Yes.
especially,
Yes.
to navigate race and culture in contemporary America?
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't sit him down and tell him. You wrote a whole book.
I did.
Why? What'd you say?
What did I say? I mean, part of what I said is I began the book talking about my frustration that people kept saying to me, oh, it must be so hard to raise black children. And yes, but it's also so beautiful. And I wanted to tell a story to them about the unbelievable beauty and joy that is involved in raising them, that it's not all defined by the challenge and the difficulty. And in fact, the adversity is devastating because it's actually so beautiful and they are glorious. So sometimes I have friends of mine who are also mothers, who are white women, who are like, oh, I could identify with this book. I didn't, I know I'm not supposed to. And I said, you're absolutely supposed to, because it is actually about the beauty of child rearing, the desire to want them to be conscious of what challenges they will face, but not clip their wings, to allow them to soar, and to talk about part of the way that you do soar is to draw upon this extraordinary tradition that we have of becoming despite the obstacles. And so, and I felt that there were so many messages that were focusing on simply the limitation, simply the adversity, and I wanted them to feel a greater sense of possibility for their lives.
You don't want to raise a child in fear.
Right. No, it's not. Yeah.
That's unhealthy.
It's unhealthy, and that's not how I was raised. And and I thought, well, if I could be born, in Birmingham, Alabama in 1972 and be raised with a sense of possibility and courage, I certainly could offer that to my children.
So you may be part of a new movement, which we've discussed recently around here, the re-freeing of childhood.
Yeah.
I mean, children have been so completely controlled that nobody goes out after school. They don't dare go out in the playground. But I think the pendulum is shifting back.
Yeah, well,
and
I
you're
am
helping
definitely.
with that.
I'm trying to. I've sent my kids off to other countries. I'm trying. I want them to. I want them to experience life as fully as possible. To go the way their blood beats, as James Baldwin said.
The new book.
Yes.
Which has, of course, been a sensation. I mean, National Book Award and MacArthur, and it's just really been a monster.
Yeah.
There is a list, there is a catalog of tours of the South. And this is the newest one.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do it? And can you explain the subtitle, which suggests that if you want to know what America's all about, you have to look south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Absolutely. Well, so the why begins with this lifetime of going back and forth and feeling consistently like the accounts, whether it was in an academic context or in my kind of social world, that the characterization of the South that I heard constantly in the Northeast didn't sound like the place that I called home at all. That it was often described as this backwards, other, behind place, as opposed to this place that I knew of incredible courage and dignity, and the source of so much, for better and worse, of this society.
Okay.
The South is the region where what we would know as the United States began. Right? It's contradictions, it's tensions, the sense of possibility from the very outset. Humans, the suffering of indigenous people and African people, of working people, all of it starts here. And so I wanted to tell a story that was a reframing of the way we see the South and also see the nation. And the easiest way I can say it is, I talk about an ancestor of mine who was named either Easter or Esther Love, who was enslaved according to at least one census account, she was born in 1769 in Maryland. Her parents were also born in Maryland. So I descend from people who were enslaved in the colonial period. And I wanted to think about, well, how do I tell a story that puts the life of someone like her, who likely worked in tobacco fields, who came of age as the nation was becoming a nation, but was not contemplated as part of the nation, right? How do you tell a story of this country from the underside, right, of people who have been here? And so that's what I was trying to do, because I think that that when we do that, we have the possibility of getting closer to right relation, and to actually be offering an honest story. There's a reason that people love to hear stories from the South. So many books are journeys of the South. There's a reason why American music comes out of the South. There is something there that moves people deeply, that I think we could use the way people are moved to actually move us into a better direction.
Geographically, in your book, you move from Virginia, even, I guess, and then Florida and the Bahamas and Cuba, all the way to Houston, Texas. You're really all over the place. Something that I didn't get the chronology straight in one respect that I'm curious about. Did COVID play a part in where you could go and when and what you were willing to do, especially with your own health being delicate?
Absolutely, it did. I mean, there was a chapter on Arkansas that I took out of the book because I couldn't go back because of COVID. I had many more sections on Texas that I had to take out. And so so I had taken a bunch of trips, and there are also places I had been many times. But I actually wound up relying more on my own personal history, this kind of background of being in these places than I initially intended because of the limitations on returning. And just some places I didn't know well enough, even though I had been there, to write about. I mean, I just didn't feel comfortable writing about Arkansas, having only been there twice, So it shaped a great deal. But also, I don't know if you experienced this, but for me during lockdown, my memory got really sharp. It was almost as though, like being shut off from the outside world, I started to sort of have these flood of memories. And so it actually helped with writing,
I would not have thought that.
Yeah.
My friends and acquaintances all dealt with COVID differently.
Yeah.
From people who in terror put themselves in solitary confinement, all the way to people who foolishly ignored it pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
There was an enormous spectrum. The places a quick question about retrieval.
Yes.
Something that you're doing. When I was a young fellow, teacher, it was a commonly agreed that one of the great lamentations of African Americans was that they had no way to have the family history, the ancestry. Now we think of Ancestry.com, God help us, and so on. And time has passed, and it isn't just Skip Gates. It isn't just him.
Yes.
Everybody now talks about how they are retrieving family histories that people thought because of illiteracy or for other reasons.
That they couldn't retrieve.
And this is your experience, yes?
Absolutely. And I should say, I was just talking to Skip day before yesterday, right? I mean, so it's interesting because in African American studies, there's sort of two waves in recent history. One is a concern, this focus on all of the new technologies of retrieval, whether we're talking about DNA technology or the digitization of census records and various archival materials. On the other hand, there are still a lot of people who are focused on the gaps, the losses, and the like. And I consider myself somewhere in between, in the sense that I talk about our history as that of an incomplete puzzle. But I tend not towards lamentation, because I think when you look at all of human history, this idea of sort of diligent documentation of everything that happened is unusual, right? That's not actually the norm. And storytelling is just as important for the formation of identity as documents, right? So, but I have found a great deal which is, in wills and census records, and which is wonderful and remarkable. But then the question becomes, what story do you tell out of that, out of those pieces, out of those fragments? And that, I think, is the interesting part.
You have a demonstrated powerful interest in family and history and Africa with a K, and African American studies, and the whole business of the African continent. It was my pleasure to be acquainted with Albert Murray, who was not interested
At all
in that. And it was, and
Yes.
in your book, every once in a while, you cycle back and you say, this is not something Albert Murray was interested in.
Right.
And his approach to
Yes.
music
Yes.
was different from yours.
Yes.
When he and I would speak, he would be talking about French philosophers.
Yes.
And his most famous utterance, and he was on this show twice over the years, but his most famous utterance in this context is, "I am not a hyphenated American."
Yes.
You remember that, of course.
Absolutely.
How this is not a yes, no, right, wrong situation. He's interested in things differently from you, from the way you are. But how do you reconcile that? When you spoke with him, what happened?
So I never spoke with him directly,
wow.
but was so incredibly influential to me. I feel like, he's sort of one of these people who, there's some thinkers who shape everything that you do, even when you're arguing with them, and that's who Murray was for me. And so I think I found him to be one of the most brilliant thinkers about American music, about African American culture. I admired his insistence on not seeing Black Americans not as some people bereft of heritage, but actually as being born in this nation. It's just that I also see that Black American culture is also arterial, as having all of these connections to the world. So it's really, it's not so much an argument as a kind of different way of telling the story. But I also can't ever I can't get away from him. Like I'll say, well, I don't agree with that, but gosh, it's so brilliant.
He's the only Alabama writer in the Library of American Classics. And Bruce, have you had a chance to meet Bruce Devlin, who is the Albert Murray scholar? And Bruce Devlin has written the introductions for now 2 volumes of Murray in that series.
Yeah.
Music. You wrote a whole book on hip hop.
Yes.
To me, this is life on the dark side of the moon. I do not understand it. But in those chapters, in your writing about music, and in your writing about women and their dress and their jewelry and so on, you come out in praise of what you call adornment.
Yes.
Adornment it repeats in your book, so it's important.
Yes.
Tell me about adornment.
Oh, what a wonderful observation. Thank you. It has this incredible history. So, it's not in this book, but it's part of what I'm writing about. There are accounts in the 18th century of enslaved women insisting upon blue fabric, for example.
Yes.
Right? There are these ways of adornment actually being a mark of dignity, elegance as being a mark of dignity despite conditions. And this is something that Murray understood so powerfully. Right?
He was elegant.
He was so elegant, right? And he wrote about the elegance as a way of being. And I think that was really apt. And I especially want to emphasize it now because there's a way in which that gets dismissed as trivial, but it is actually a form of self-regard that I think is quite important,
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I think people, all kinds of different people on little Greek islands do.
That's right.
People in South America do. I mean, it's not.
No, it's universal. It's human.
Right. It is. I am somebody.
Yes, that's right. That's it.
But I stopped short of teeth grid.
No grills.
No grills. Right. You can see how far.
No gold teeth or iced out grills. Yes.
You can see how far short I stopped because I got the word wrong.
Right.
So.
But there's a continuum between the grills that rappers wear And when I quoted Murray extensively in my book on Lift Every Voice and Sing, the song that's known as the Black National Anthem, in which he talks in his description of the significance of the song, he attached it to attire,
Yes.
to posture, all those sorts of things. So there's a continuum.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course, of course. And where there is a continuum, there will be excess.
That's right.
We have 2 minutes. I don't
Okay.
want to spend the first minute allowing you to kind of make a statement about this preposterous, but we'll do it anyway. You toured around the South. You've been looking at, studying the South since '72, so to speak. Are you, loosely speaking, in the camp of somebody like John Lewis, who says, you know, a lot of things have really gotten better,
Sure.
but a lot of what you write is things are really still pretty rotten? And everybody who speaks with you about your book must come to this particular spot, right?
Absolutely, because both can be true.
Uh-huh.
You know, I do not have the life of my grandparents, but there is still a great deal of suffering. And I guess the way that I think about what we have to grapple with in this nation is not so sort of, I don't think in terms of a steady march towards better. I think about what are the fault lines that get in the way of the sort of the promise of liberty and justice for all, irrespective of who we're talking about. How do we sort of imagine a way of being in relation to each other that is more consistently humane? That's the question. So without question, things are better. There's also a great deal of suffering, and I want to use the past to understand, to help us understand how to be better to each other today.
It is a false polarity, but it
Yeah.
is the polarity of an awful lot of contemporary cultural discussion.
Absolutely.
As promised, we're down to 1 minute, and I am really curious about what your next project is. What book will we see from you next?
About a year from now, Black and Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People, which is it's a concise journey over 500 years of history of how the various people of various cultures and nations and backgrounds in Africa and also Europe and also the Americas become known as Black Americans, beginning with the indigo trade through blues music, it's consistently about, I use stories around the color blue to get to that conclusion about how a people become a people who out of an ignoble designation
Blue
becomes
fabric,
something beautiful.
blue ceilings,
Paint blue porches,
blue
yes.
porches,
And
the blues.
blue, in Charleston, the bottle trees with cobalt blue bottles,
Yes.
all that stuff, yes.
Well, you know what we ought to do about the blues? Stomp them.
Yes,
Is-
indeed.
is-
As Murray said, stomp the blues.
It's the way of it. This has been a pleasure. We could talk all day, but we are out of time.
Thank
I
you.
hope, with your next book, I hope that your publishers send you through Alabama again, and we'll sit down again.
I will be here regardless.
Thank you.
Thank you.